The Batman Beyond episode Meltdown is my top favorite episode from that series. The way they handled bringing Freeze back for one last story and actually brought his story to a close was very well done. This is also the episode where we first get to see how powerful Blight can be, and the short battle between the two of them is thrilling. Naturally, with it being my favorite, I'm here today to show you how I made those two characters in the same video. This will be a bit unique too, as I made both figures a few years before I began filming my progress. Blight was started and finished, but Freeze got going and was put on hold. I picked him back up after this channel kicked off, so you'll see the footage start about halfway through his creation. Both figures also have some excellent accessories that put them over the top, so sit back and enjoy watching these two absolute titans come to life. Like I said a minute ago, I started on Mr. Freeze a few years ago and ended up taking a good 2 to 3 year break on him. I was really excited to make him and then realized at one point that he wasn't going to work the way he was going, so I put him in cold storage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I went to start on Victor's recipe, I was waffling between a few different options. His shoulders match Azrael, but his torso could match either Azrael or TNBA Mr. Freeze. I was already planning to use his TNBA figure for his legs because this Freeze design kept the skinny legs from the new Batman Adventures. The question was, could I use the entire figure for this guy and have zero waist? No, I decided to go with the Azrael torso and arms on the TNBA Freeze legs because it would be too much to try and build up the shoulders to match as opposed to dremeling down Azrael's bigger ones. When you have joints, it's almost always better to remove than to add onto a figure in order to keep the joint fairly functioning. For his head, you might think you could use the TNBA Freeze head, but it's far smaller than you'd expect. Especially once you compare it to Azrael's torso, you see that it definitely won't work. What do we do now? Could a BTAS Freeze head work? No, that's not quite the right shape anymore after his TNBA redesign. My next thought, after looking over my collection for parts ideas, was to settle on modifying the Gods and Monsters Batman Kirk Langstrom alternate head due to both its overall size and longer shape. The nose was fairly close too, but that would require some additional sculpting. With the parts decided on, it was time to start molding him into shape. You start by heating the figures up and removing Azrael's cape and armor piece, then dremeling down those giant ball-shaped shoulders. Shave down his gauntlets and boots and you're ready to add some epoxy. He has pretty specifically designed armor and boots, so be sure to replicate exactly what you see. I chose to emphasize his mock enlarged circuitry as well as the vents on his shoulders. I raised the circuitry looking pieces on his forearms and legs and pressed the black vent pieces in. His head will take a fair amount of dremeling to make him bald, but once you do that you can add to his nose and give him his trademark goggles. I began painting him at this point as I thought I was ready to add color to him. Boy was I wrong. This blurry shot of his torso and leg combo made him way too tall, and I felt like I kind of had to go back to the drawing board. Thankfully it wasn't that dramatic, but there was quite a bit of revision needed all the same. Here we are 2 to 3 years later, and I wanted to finally finish him up in time for his big 25-year anniversary post. His major problem was just how tall he was going to end up, so I needed to cut down his middle section, legs, and neck quite a bit. Honestly, I'm not sure how I never noticed it before this, but it just goes to show you how important it is when picking parts to double check your scale before going too far. I forgot that part of the height issue was compounded when I experimented straightening his neck out to reposition it instead of the hunch they gave Azrael. I ended up digging in much further in order to get Freeze's chin to nearly be buried in the helmet. His design is very iconic in my mind, so I wanted to get everything just right. Since there was so much time between his first and second passes, I kind of came back to him with fresh eyes and started seeing more things wrong with him. I saw that the overall shapes on his chest armor were wrong and would need to change if I shortened him anyway. Without fixing, he would pretty much end up without a midsection. No matter, that's what a Dremel and epoxy sculpt are for. Here I am sketching out the new armor shapes, and you can see it took a couple of attempts to nail it. Once I have them all marked up, I can take him down to the Dremel. I realized there that I could take out some more height if I dremeled up into the stomach cap so that it fit down lower on his waist. I also needed to cut a wider shape in his armor at the stomach to match his source material. Time to cut his legs at a spot that evens out so you don't notice the change too much. When gluing them back together, we'll cover the seams with this molding putty and smooth them out. Now we can fix his shapes with some epoxy up around his neck to fill in and make his collar, as well as altering his arm vent placement. His helmet seal / collar was made from gluing 2 figure twist ties together and painting them blue. The helmet itself is a glass bell shape I bought online. With his revisions all done, that brings us back around to dripping some paint on him again. I didn't show you before, but these are the colors I chose for Victor. 2 blues, a black, white, and a red. As always, the last step in painting is whether or not you like to cel shade your figures. Personally, I enjoy it as it brings them that much closer to their exact animated look, and it works particularly well for metal, so I was excited to see it on Freeze. One portion of his cel shading that kind of isn't an option is his face. Much like the TNBA Scarecrow repaint I did, link up top if you haven't seen it yet, this is a bit of a requirement for him to look right. Can you imagine how plain and weird he'd look without it? Another area I noticed that I got wrong the first time around was his mouth shading. I don't know what I was thinking originally, but my first take of the black shape ended up looking more like a soul patch than anything else, and I needed to widen it for it to look right. Much better now. Tighten up any transition lines, whether black next to blue or black next to white, and he's all done. Overall, I'm glad Freeze had his hiatus because the figure turned out so much better for it. Let that be a lesson to not give up when you get frustrated with these. Just take a step back, switch to something else, and come back to see how you can fix things. The time between lets you see any blemishes or blights you might have made. Did someone say blight? The character of Blight is perhaps one of the most memorable things about Batman Beyond for me. The closing image of the glowing green laughing skeleton from the pilot Rebirth really just sticks with you and makes you wonder how he'll be used. It's very surprising when you go back and look to find that he only has 3 appearances in the first season, then he's gone. Of those 3 episodes, Meltdown can't be topped, and he's a real force of nature in it. All that to say, I was really excited to make Blight, so I made him pretty much right away because he was such a must-have for my shelf. Much like Derek Powers before him, link up top if you want to see him get made, I made him using some spare parts and TNBA Joker pants. TNBA Scarecrow was kind enough to donate his sleeves because they both share the ripped up cuff look. Whose hands could go in those cuffs then? How about Ra's al Ghul's spare swappable forearms? Perfect. Now, where could I find a skull head? I looked on eBay for a few options and I bought 1 or 2 that ended up being too small. Then I came across a Marvel Legends figure whose accessory was a flaming clear green skull. If I could remove the flames, I'd then have an excellent way to light up his head for photos. The head came, and sure enough, the flames came off and I went to work dremeling the skull to open up the eyes and match Blight's shape. Much like Freeze, his black shading on the face defines his character, so that was an absolute must. I continued that shading down his chest and on his forearms by first drawing my shapes and then painting over them. If you attempt this, I highly recommend using glow-in-the-dark paint as your base instead of this parakeet green I chose. I have since gone back and painted the UV color in between his black parts, but I don't suggest that method. It's far too easy to mess that up. Anyway, put them all together and you have one very convincing Blight figure, especially when you turn off the lights and shine a black light on him. He's perfect. So much better than I was expecting. Both he and Freeze use some kind of blasts in the episode, so I had to make those to complete these guys. Much like Ink, link above, Blight ended up using hot glue covered figure twist ties for his effects too. I tried some experimenting after seeing a couple videos on the idea. I wondered if you could cover the twist tie and then bend it into the shape of a ball for his trademark radioactive bursts he throws from his hands. Sure enough, it worked perfectly. He's seen here balling up one of said blasts, getting ready to fire it. An alternate idea for his blasts could be McFarlane's DC Multiverse Green Lantern's energy accessories. I've painted them with the same UV color and that makes a cool effect too. As for Freeze, I kind of went all out with him in the same way I did with my Ink figure. I ended up making a freeze blast for his hand, a steaming vapor effect for each fisted hand, and full ice blast for each hand, and a base to recreate his unforgettable entrance coming up out of the floor. For the first single blast piece, I started by making a blast star shape for his hand. A neat tip when working with hot glue is to use oven baking paper as it's heat resistant and you can reuse it over and over to draw hot glue shapes. Then I stuck one of the DCC figure stand poles in the middle to work as the core of the horizontal effect and covered it in hot glue. Another tip I discovered along the way, if you keep a bowl of cold water nearby, you can dip that in after gluing to maintain a smooth look to your glue. The last excellent tip is to wrap a cylinder with the baking paper and draw your glue around it. This will hold the cylinder shape and let you remove the glue no problem to achieve the classic spiral effect around Freeze's ice that the DCAU always portrayed. For his vapor effects, I had a neat idea to use the plastic of a figure bubble so that it would hold shape and be perfectly thin and light to stay on his hands. Just draw out a shape resembling the steam vapor, cut it out, and paint it. The last thing is his big ice base. For the ice block, it's a simple piece of thick styrofoam that I sketched a rough shape out and used a hobby foam hot knife to cut through and make it. For the blasts, I was fortunate enough that Hasbro had recently put out some G.I. Joe blast effects that looked like they'd be absolutely perfect for this if their size was right. I had to trim a little bit of the spirals, but for the most part they worked exactly like I had hoped. They just needed a new paint job and could then be set up rather nicely to make the scene on my shelf. Now the only problem is deciding how I want to display him, with or without Blight. The base is just too perfect, so I ended up placing him in the back center to draw all of the attention. Both of these figures turned out even better than I could have hoped, and here are a couple of beauty shots of them. Follow me on Instagram if you want to see more shots like these and all of my latest work. Also, if you're on there and make some of your own customs, I'd love to see them. Take Drumming Guy for example. He recently made a custom Batman and a repainted Condiment King and tagged me in his post. That was really great to see. It's awesome to be a part of this customizing community, and it's so cool that we can all inspire each other. Thanks for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video and subscribe for more monthly content like this and occasional shorts featuring tips or additional customs. Our next video pauses the Batman Beyond 25th Anniversary celebration in favor of the Justice League Unlimited 20th Anniversary. We'll be looking at one of my newest customs, as I'm currently still working on him, the Green Arrow. Captain Atom will tag along at the end of that one too, like he did in the pilot episode. Check out the rest of my catalog of videos while you wait for that next one. Have a good one, and happy customizing.